The slave markets of Station smelled like burning metal and fear. Cole stood in chains, his wrists raw from the tight cuffs, and watched the aliens walk past him like he was nothing more than furniture for sale. There were tall creatures, almost 8 feet high, with hard shells covering their bodies like armor made of dark jewels. Their faces had no expressions that could read, just large compound eyes that reflected the light in strange ways, and mandibles that clicked when they spoke. They moved with the confidence of creatures who had never known defeat. Had known plenty of defeat. The scars on his body told that story. The long one across his chest came from the Battle of Europa when the first came to Earth's solar system. The burns on his arms were from the siege of Mars' colony. The smaller cuts and marks came from 100 fights, 100 desperate moments, 100 times he should have died but didn't. He was the last survivor of the Earth Defense Force's 7th Fleet. Everyone else was dead or scattered across the galaxy as slaves, just like him now. Around stood 11 other humans. Some were crying. Some were praying to gods that hadn't answered in years. A young woman near him was shaking so hard her chains rattled against the metal floor. Wanted to tell her to stop to save her strength, but he stayed silent. He had learned that silence was useful. Silence let you watch. Silence let you learn. A buyer stopped in front of their cage. This one was different from the others. Her shell was a deeper purple, almost black, decorated with gold patterns that marked high rank. Her compound eyes were larger than most, and when she looked she tilted her head like a bird studying a worm. "This one," she said, pointing a long claw at him. Her voice was like stones grinding together. "The one, what is his story?" The slave trader, a fat creature with too many arms and a smell like rotting fruit, hurried over with his data pad. "Ah, excellent eye, High Matriarch Eth. This specimen is a military officer, a commander they call it, captured during the fall of the human colony on Titan. Very rare find. Most of their soldiers fight until death." "Why didn't this one?" Eth asked. The trader laughed nervously. His ship was destroyed. He was pulled from the wreckage unconscious. By the time he woke up, he was already in chains. I'm told he killed 6 guards before they managed to drug him. Eth stepped closer to the cage. Her eyes moved over his body, counting his scars like she was reading a map, stared back at her without blinking. Most humans looked away when they made eye contact. Something about those compound eyes triggered fear in the human brain, but had looked into worse things than alien eyes. He had watched his entire crew burn. Nothing scared him anymore. "He doesn't look away," Eth observed. "Interesting, most of your kind cower before us." "He's damaged," the trader said quickly. "Mentally broken, perhaps. The trauma of capture affects some of them this way, makes them empty inside, but he still works. He still obeys commands, he just doesn't react like the others." Eth's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "A soldier who has seen too much death. How delightful, I'll take him." The price was negotiated quickly. Didn't hear the numbers. He was busy counting things. 7 guards in this section of the market, 4 exits, 15 steps to the nearest weapon rack, 22 between him and freedom. Not yet, he told himself, not the right moment. They removed him from the cage and attached a control collar around his neck. One press of a button and it would send electricity through his spine, dropping him to the ground in agony. Had seen it used on other slaves. He memorized the frequency the collar operated on. Useful information for later. Eth walked in front of him as guards pushed him toward her private transport. The ship was beautiful in a cold way, all sharp angles and dark metal like a knife made for flying. Counted the guards again. 8 on the ship, all armed with plasma rifles. The rifles had a 2-second charge time between shots, also useful information. Inside the ship, Eth sat on a throne-like chair and studied her new purchase. Stood before her, still in chains, his face empty of emotion. "You intrigue me, human," she said. "Your species is weak, small, short-lived. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom, yet your kind fights with a desperation that surprises us. Why is that?" "Said nothing." "You may speak," Eth said, a hint of irritation in her grinding voice. "I command it." "We fight," said slowly, "because we have nothing left to lose." Eth laughed. The sound was horrible, like metal scraping against glass. "Nothing to lose. You have your lives, your comfort. If you serve well, you can live in relative peace. Good food, warm beds. Some of my slaves even seem happy after a few years." "Happy slaves are still slaves," replied. The guards shifted nervously. No one spoke to the high matriarch this way, but Eth raised a claw to stop them from punishing him. "Spirit," she said, "you have spirit. I wondered if the scars had beaten it out of you, but no, it's still there, buried deep." She leaned forward. "I'm going to enjoy breaking that spirit, Commander. It's been too long since I had a real challenge." Looked at her, just looked, and somewhere deep in those empty eyes something flickered, not fear, not anger, something colder, something patient. The ship began to move, carrying them away from the station toward her estate on the jungle moon below. Through the window could see Prime growing larger. Somewhere down there he knew there would be other slaves, other prisoners, other people who had lost everything. And guards and weapons and information. Eth noticed him staring at her elite guards' plasma rifles. His eyes moved over them the way a craftsman looks at tools. "Dreaming of escape, pet," she laughed. "Dreaming of fighting back. You should know that no slave has ever escaped from House Eth, not in 3,000 years." Turned from the window and met her compound eyes, and for the first time since his capture, he smiled. It was a small smile, quiet, almost gentle. Eth felt something strange in her chest. Her secondary hearts skipped in a way they never had before. The smile wasn't threatening. There was no anger in it, no hatred. That was what made it so unsettling. It was the smile of someone who knew something she didn't. The smile of someone who had already seen the future and found it satisfying. 3,000 years, thought. That's a long time to grow comfortable. A long time to forget what desperate creatures are capable of. He let the smile fade and returned to silence. The waiting had begun. 3 months passed on Prime, and Cole became invisible. He learned to walk with his head down. He learned to move quietly, to speak only when spoken to bow at the correct angle when past him in the hallways. He became the perfect slave, and because of this, they stopped watching him so closely. This was exactly what he wanted. House Eth was a palace made of crystal and dark stone, spreading across a hilltop in the middle of an endless jungle. The trees outside were tall as mountains, with leaves that glowed faintly in the darkness. Strange creatures howled at night, and the air was thick and wet and hard to breathe, but had survived worse atmospheres. He had survived vacuum. He had survived fire. He could survive this. The estate held over 200 slaves from dozens of different worlds. They worked in the kitchens, the gardens, the manufacturing halls, the cleaning crews. They were watched by armed guards and controlled by the collars around their necks. Most of them had been here for years. Most of them had given up hope. Found hope in the strangest places. Was a species with 4 arms and skin like rough leather. He had been a mechanic on a trading ship before they captured him. Now he maintained the estate's machines, and his clever hands could fix anything. More importantly, those clever hands could also break things in ways that looked like accidents. "You watch too much," whispered to one night in the slave quarters. "The guards notice people who watch." "The guards notice people who look dangerous," replied. "I don't look dangerous, I look broken." Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Are you broken?" Didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "How long would it take you to disable the power grid for Section 4? His 4 eyes went wide. "That's where the armory is." "I know." They stared at each other for a long moment, then smiled with a mouth full of flat grinding teeth. 15 minutes, Maybe 10 if I have the right tools. Can you make the right tools? Brother said, I can make anything. The second friend maid was stranger. Her name was Whisper, and she was a species of pale creatures with no eyes and skin so thin you could see their bones beneath it. They considered her defective because she was blind and could not work like the other slaves. They kept her alive only because killing slaves without reason was considered wasteful. But Whisper was not defective. She was a telepath. I know what you're planning, she said to one day, her voice soft as wind through leaves. I can feel it in your mind, a dark shape, a purpose. You're going to kill them all. Felt a chill run through him. He had never spoken his plans aloud. Can the others feel it too? No, their minds are like stones, cold and hard and closed. They cannot hear thoughts. Whisper tilted her head. But I can, and I want to help. Why? Because they took my family, she said simply. My husband, my children. They sold them to different buyers across the galaxy. I will never see them again. Her thin hands found his and gripped them with surprising strength. I want them to suffer, Cole. I want them to know the pain they have caused. So had a mechanic and a telepath. He began collecting more. There was a small furry creature from a forest world who could move through spaces no larger than a man's fist. He became spy, crawling through the walls and ceilings, mapping every part of the estate. There was Old, a former general from a conquered empire, who had been a slave for 20 years but never forgotten how to plan a battle. There were humans too, 7 of them scattered throughout the estate, including a young woman named Ella who had been born in captivity and never known freedom. Taught her what freedom meant, and the fire that lit in her eyes was beautiful. By day, worked in the kitchens. He prepared food, cleaned dishes, carried trays. He learned which rooms the powerful guests visited. He learned where they stored their weapons. He learned the codes to the security systems by watching the guards' fingers when they thought no one was looking. By night, he taught the others. A weapon is anything that can cause harm, he told them in secret meetings held in the deepest basements. A kitchen knife, a stone, a piece of broken glass. You don't need plasma rifles to fight. You just need the will to use what you have. He taught them to move silently, to strike quickly, to aim for the soft places between armor plates. He taught them patience most of all. We get one chance, he said again and again. One moment when everything comes together. If we move too early, we die. If we move too late, we die. We must wait for the perfect moment. How will we know when it comes? Ella asked. I'll know, said. Ed's son was called Al, and he was everything his mother was not. Where she was cold and calculating, he was hot and cruel. He enjoyed hurting the slaves. It gave him pleasure to cause pain. One evening, Al came to the slave quarters drunk on some alien substance that made his eyes glow bright red. He grabbed Whisper by her thin arm and dragged her into the corridor. Blind thing, he slurred. Useless creature, let's see if you can feel pain like the others. He bent her arm backward until it broke with a wet snap. Whisper screamed. Standing nearby did not move. His hands curled into fists at his sides, but his face remained empty and cold and patient. Later, after Al had grown bored and left, bandaged Whisper's arm with torn cloth. His hands were gentle, but his eyes were not. Why didn't you stop him? Whisper asked through her tears. Because if I had, they would have killed me, and if they kill me now, everything we've built dies with me. He finished tying the bandage. But I promise you this, Whisper. When the time comes, Al will be the first to fall, and I will make sure he knows exactly who brought him down. Whisper touched his face with her thin fingers, reading his emotions the way a blind person reads raised letters. There is so much rage in you, she murmured. So much pain. How do you contain it? I don't contain it, said. I save it. Every wound they give us goes into a place deep inside me, and when the time comes, I will give it all back to them. Every drop, every scar, every tear. The waiting continued. 1 month later, word spread through the estate that the 7 high houses of the were coming to House Eth for a great gathering. Admirals and generals would attend. War plans would be discussed. The entire military leadership of the empire would be in one place for 3 days of celebration. Smiled when he heard the news. The moment was coming. The great gathering began on a night when 3 moons hung in the purple sky of Prime. Ships landed one after another on the estate's private platforms, carrying the most powerful in the empire. Watched from the kitchen windows, counting them. 7 high houses, 47 admirals, over 300 elite guards. And in the pocket of his slave uniform, hidden beneath dirty cloth, was a transmitter no larger than a coin. Had built it from stolen parts over the last 2 months. Every night, had used it to send signals into the deep black of space. Someone out there was listening, someone was coming. The human refugee fleet had not been destroyed as the believed. They had scattered, yes, fled to the dark spaces between stars where sensors could not find them, but they had not given up. They had regrouped in the shadows, rebuilt their strength, and waited for information. Was giving them that information. On the second night of the gathering, Eth summoned to her private chambers. He walked through the crystal halls with his head down, past drunk officers who didn't even notice the slave among them. To them, he was furniture, background, nothing. Eth's room was large and cold, filled with trophies from conquered worlds. Skulls of strange creatures sat on shelves. Flags of fallen nations hung on the walls. And in the center of it all, the High Matriarch herself sat on a throne made from the bones of her enemies. "Leave us," she commanded her guards. They obeyed without question. When they were alone, Eth studied with those unreadable compound eyes. "You've been a good slave these past months," she said. "Quiet, obedient, efficient. My household managers speak highly of you." Said nothing. "But I wonder," she continued, "if it's an act. That spirit I saw when I bought you, that fire in your eyes, has it truly died, or is it hiding somewhere deep inside?" "I am what you made me," replied. His voice was flat, dead. Eth made a sound like grinding stones. Laughter, pretty words, but I don't believe them. She stood from her throne and walked toward him. Even without her guards, she was dangerous. Her claws could tear through metal. Her venom could kill in seconds. "I have a proposal for you, Commander Cole." He looked up at the use of his rank. She smiled at his reaction. "Yes, I know who you were. I've learned much about your species in these months. You humans have a talent for survival that almost impresses me. Almost." She circled him slowly like a predator. "Here is my offer. Tell me about your military, your weapons, your hidden bases. Tell me where the other survivors are hiding, and in exchange I will give you your freedom." "Freedom," repeated. "Of a sort. You would remain on my estate, but as a guest rather than a slave. Good food, comfortable quarters, perhaps even companions if you desire them." Her mandibles clicked. "Your people are already broken. What difference does it make if we find them a little sooner? You could live out your days in comfort instead of dying in these kitchens." Thought about the offer. He thought about all the humans still hiding in the dark, praying that the wouldn't find them. He thought about children who had never known safety, about families torn apart, about everything that had been taken. "No," he said. Eth's eyes narrowed. "No, just like that. Just like that." She moved so fast he barely saw it. Her claw struck his face, cutting a line across his cheek. Blood dripped onto the floor. "Ungrateful creature," she hissed. "I offer you mercy and you throw it away. Perhaps pain will change your mind." She called the guards back. They dragged to a post in the center of the room and chained him there. With a whip stepped forward. 20 lashes, Eth commanded. "Let's see if that loosens his tongue." The whip came down on his back. The pain was blinding. He had been hurt before many times, but this was something new. The whip had tiny hooks that tore flesh as well as striking it. He did not scream. "One," he said calmly, his voice steady despite the agony. The whip fell again, 2. Again, 3. Eth watched with growing confusion. The slaves always screamed. They always begged. This human simply counted each blow like he was marking time. 4, 5, 6. Blood ran down his back, pooling at his feet. The guards shifted uncomfortably. There was something wrong about this, something unnatural. 15, 16, 17. By the 20th lash, the room was silent except for a steady voice. He hung from the chains, barely conscious, his back a ruin of torn meat. But he had not screamed, had not begged, had not broken. 18, 19, 20. Eth dismissed the guards and approached him alone. She lifted his chin with one claw and looked into his eyes. What she saw there made her step back. Nothing, there was nothing, just empty darkness and infinite patience. "What are you?" she whispered. Smiled through cracked lips. "I am what you made me," he repeated. "Remember that." They threw him back in the slave quarters. Whisper and tended his wounds while the others stood guard. The cuts were deep but not deadly. Would heal. He always healed. That night, still wrapped in bloody bandages, he crawled through the corridors to a place where the walls were thin. The admirals were meeting in the room beyond, discussing their next campaign. Through the wall, he listened to everything. Fleet positions, troop numbers, the locations of human refugee colonies they planned to raid. All of it went into his memory and later into his transmitter. One more day. The gathering would end tomorrow night, and the admirals would scatter back to their posts. The moment had to come before then. Late on the third night, was walking through the servant passages when he heard laughing. Al's laughing. He followed the sound and found the young with 3 of his friends, dragging a human girl toward his private rooms. She was new, barely 14 years old, taken in a recent raid. Her eyes were wild with terror. She was screaming for help, but no one was listening. No one ever listened. Stepped into the corridor. Al stopped and looked at him with amusement. "The quiet one, the empty one. What do you want, slave? Step aside." Did not step aside. "You'd better flee, human," Al laughed, releasing the girl and drawing his blade. "This doesn't concern you. Go back to your kitchen before I..." Moved. No one saw it happen clearly. One moment he was standing still. The next, Al was on the floor with his shell cracked in 3 places, making sounds of pain no should make. His friends lay around him, unconscious or groaning. Stood over them, perfectly calm, not even breathing hard. He looked at the girl. "Run," he said softly. "Find Whisper in the slave quarters. Tell her it's time." The girl ran. Alarms began to sound. Guards poured into the corridor. Let them take him. He had accomplished what he needed. The spark had been lit. They dragged him before Eth in her throne room. All 7 high houses were present, staring at the human who had dared to raise his hand against a noble. Al was being carried to the medical wing, his shell shattered, his pride destroyed. Eth's rage was cold and terrible. "You've killed yourself," she said. "I'm going to make an example of you. Every slave in this estate will watch you die slowly over the course of days. They will learn what happens to those who rebel." Looked up at her. His face was calm, his eyes were clear. "I've been waiting for you to gather the other houses here, matriarch," he said. "Thank you for the invitation." Eth opened her mouth to respond, but then one of her admirals made a strange sound. He was looking at the window. Outside, the sky was filling with fire. Ships, human ships, dozens of them, dropping out of faster-than-light travel directly above the estate. Explosions bloomed across the landing platforms as the vessels tried to launch and failed. Smiled. "You asked me what I am," he said to Eth. "Let me show you." The lights went out, had killed the power. And in the darkness, the slaves began to rise. The darkness lasted only seconds, but those seconds were enough. Across the estate, slaves who had been waiting for months finally moved. Kitchen workers grabbed knives they had sharpened in secret. Gardeners picked up tools that could crush shells. Mechanics triggered explosions in machines they had sabotaged weeks ago. And through it all, Whisper's telepathic voice guided them like music only they could hear. Now she told them, "Now is the time. Strike for your freedom. Strike for your families. Strike for everyone they have taken from you." The emergency lights came on, casting everything in blood-red shadows. Eth screamed orders to her guards, but the chaos was already spreading too fast. Explosions shook the eastern wing. Fires broke out in the armory, and somewhere in the darkness, slaves were fighting back with a fury that they had never imagined possible. Was still in chains before Eth's throne, but he was no longer surrounded by guards. They had all rushed toward the exits, toward the sounds of battle, leaving only 3 soldiers to watch one beaten slave. 3 was too many. Or it would have been, if had not been crawling through the ceiling. The small furry creature dropped onto the first guard's head, blinding him with tiny claws. The guard stumbled backward, crashing into the second, moved in that moment, swinging his chained hands like a weapon, striking the third guard's throat with the metal cuffs. The shell protected most of his body, but his throat was soft. The guard fell, choking, took his key and freed himself in seconds. The first guard had recovered now, throwing across the room. He raised his plasma rifle but was already moving. He ducked under the barrel, grabbed the rifle, and used its weight to swing the guard off balance. A quick strike to the joint between shell plates and the guard went down. The second guard fired, felt heat pass his face close enough to burn. He rolled, came up behind the throne, and threw the plasma rifle he had taken. It struck the guard's weapon, sending both spinning away. They faced each other unarmed. The guard was bigger, stronger, covered in natural armor, was half naked, covered in wounds, still bleeding from the whipping he had received hours ago. The guard laughed and charged. Did not try to match strength with strength. He waited until the last moment, then stepped aside. His hand found the soft spot under the guard's arm, jabbed deep. The screamed and stumbled, was on his back in an instant, arms wrapped around his throat, squeezing until the body went limp. He took the fallen guard's weapons and gave one too. The little creature could barely lift it, but his eyes were bright with joy. "Ready?" asked. "Born ready," chittered. "Let's kill them all." They moved through the burning estate like ghosts of vengeance. The guards were trained to fight armies. They knew how to hold lines, how to fire in formation, how to repel organized attacks. But this was not an organized attack. This was chaos made flesh. Enemies were everywhere and nowhere. Slaves who had been invisible for years were suddenly holding weapons, fighting with a desperation that bordered on madness. And leading them, coordinating them, directing them with whispered words and hand signals, was Cole. He found in the power station, surrounded by 3 dead guards and laughing with all 4 arms raised in triumph. "The main grid is down for good," the reported. "They can't call for reinforcements, can't seal the doors, can't do anything except die." The armory. Ella took it, lost 6 people, but they have plasma rifles now, real weapons. The smile faded slightly. She's leading a group toward the guest quarters, says she wants to find the admirals. Nodded. "Good, keep the power down. When the human ships land, we need the outer doors open for them." Outside, the battle in the sky was turning. The fleet had been caught by surprise, their ships still on the ground when the attack began. Many had been destroyed before they could launch. The rest were fighting desperately, but the human ships had come prepared. They knew exactly where to strike, exactly how the defenses were positioned. Because had told them everything. He made his way toward the medical wing. Al was there, being treated for his injuries. Had promised Whisper that the young would be first to fall. He intended to keep that promise. The medical wing was quiet when he arrived. Most of the guards had rushed to defend the outer walls, leaving only 2 soldiers protecting the High Matriarch's son. They died quickly, shot before they even saw coming. Al was lying on a healing bed, his shell being repaired by medical machines. When he saw Enter, his compound eyes went wide with something the rarely felt. Fear. You, Al whispered. How are you here? You're just a slave, a broken, empty thing. Walked toward him slowly. The plasma rifle hung at his side, unused. He didn't need it for this. Do you remember, said quietly, a blind girl named Whisper. You broke her arm because it amused you. She screamed and you laughed. Al tried to rise, but the machines held him down. That was nothing. She was nothing, just a defective creature. She's not nothing. She's my friend. Reached the bedside and looked down at the creature who had caused so much suffering. You asked why I didn't fight back that night. Do you understand now? I was waiting for this moment, waiting for you to be helpless while I stood over you with a choice to make. Please, Al begged. The words seemed to hurt him, did not beg. I can give you wealth, power. My mother listens to me. I can make you comfortable, give you. Give me what you took from others, shook his head. No, you can't give me anything, but you can give Whisper something. He leaned close. You can give her peace. The sound that followed echoed through the medical wing, then silence. Left the room and found Whisper waiting in the corridor. Her blind face was turned toward him, tears running down her pale cheeks. I felt it, she whispered. I felt his fear, his end. She reached out and touched his hand. Thank you. It's not over yet, replied. Can you find her, the matriarch? Whisper closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, touching hundreds of thoughts across the burning estate. After a moment, she nodded. She's in the throne room, waiting for you. She knows you're coming. Whisper squeezed his hand. She's going to try to kill you. I know. Are you afraid? Considered the question. He thought about everything he had lost, his crew, his home, his world. He thought about the scars on his body and the darkness in his soul. He thought about all the times he should have died but didn't. No, he said finally. I stopped being afraid a long time ago. Fear is a luxury for people who have something left to lose. He walked toward the throne room. The halls were filled with smoke and bodies. Guards lay dead beside their weapons. Slaves lay dead beside makeshift clubs and kitchen knives. The cost of freedom was paid in blood, and the floor was slick with it. Through the shattered windows, could see human landing craft touching down in the gardens. Soldiers in Earth Defense Force armor were pouring out, securing positions, helping the slaves who had survived. The battle in the sky was ending. The fleet was broken. But one enemy remained. Pushed open the doors to the throne room and stepped inside. Eth was waiting for him, just as Whisper had said. She stood before her bone throne with a blade in each hand, her shell cracked in places from falling debris, her eyes burning with hatred. You, she snarled, you did this, all of this. You brought ruin to my house, killed my son, destroyed everything I built over centuries. Stopped in the center of the room. He did not raise his weapon. Yes, he said simply, I did. How? The word tore out of her like a wound. You're nothing, a weak, short-lived creature from a conquered species. How could you possibly? That's the thing about conquered species, interrupted softly. We have nothing left to lose, and creatures with nothing to lose are the most dangerous things in the universe. Eth screamed and charged. Was ready. The battle between and Eth was not fair. It was never going to be fair. She was 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor that had evolved over millions of years. Her claws could cut through steel. Her venom could stop a heart in seconds. She had trained in combat since childhood, learning techniques passed down through 3,000 years of warriors. He was human, soft skin, dull teeth, no claws, no armor, no venom. He had been starved and beaten and whipped until his back was a ruin of torn flesh. By every measure that mattered, he should have been dead in seconds. But had something Eth did not. He had already decided that dying was acceptable. She swung her blades in perfect arcs, each strike designed to cut him in half. Did not try to block. He did not try to match her strength. He moved like water, flowing around her attacks, letting the blades pass so close he could feel the wind of their passage. "Stand still," Eth screamed. "Fight me properly." "This is how humans fight," replied calmly. "We don't win by being stronger. We win by not dying long enough for our enemies to make mistakes." She made a mistake. Her right blade came down in a powerful overhead strike and stepped into it instead of away. The blade caught his shoulder, cutting deep, but his arms were already around her wrist. He twisted, using her own momentum against her, and her blade clattered to the floor. She stabbed at him with the other blade, but he was already moving. Blood poured from his shoulder, but he ignored it. Pain was just information. Information could be processed later. They circled each other in the burning throne room. Through the shattered ceiling, human ships filled the sky. The sounds of battle were fading as the last guards surrendered or died. House Eth was falling, and its matriarch knew it. "Even if you kill me," she hissed, "it changes nothing. The Empire will send more fleets. We will hunt your kind to extinction." "Maybe," agreed, "but you won't be there to see it." He picked up her fallen blade. She attacked again, and this time the fight was more even. Blade met blade in a shower of sparks. Was slower than her, weaker than her, but he was also unpredictable. He didn't fight like a trained warrior. He fought like a survivor, using every dirty trick, every desperate move, every technique that formal training would have called dishonorable. He threw dust in her eyes, kicked furniture into her path, used the bodies of fallen guards as shields. When she caught him with a glancing blow across the ribs, he used the moment to get inside her guard and slash at the soft joints of her armor. Ichor sprayed from the wound. She stumbled back. "How?" she gasped again. The words seemed to be all she had left. "How are you doing this? You're wounded, dying. You should barely be able to stand." "I've been dying since the day you took me," said. "Every day as a slave was borrowed time. This is just the end I was always meant to have." He raised his blade. "The difference is I get to choose how it ends." She rushed him one final time, putting everything into a killing strike. Saw it coming. He could have dodged, could have stepped aside and let her momentum carry her past. Instead, he stepped forward. Her blade went through his side, sliding between ribs, punching out his back. The pain was beyond anything he had ever felt, but he was inside her guard now, closer than she had ever allowed an enemy to get. His blade went up, finding the gap between her head and her chest armor, driving deep. Eth froze. They stood there together, locked in each other's killing embrace, two creatures who had destroyed each other completely. Her compound eyes stared into his, and for the first time he could read the expression in them. Terror, understanding, and something that might have been respect. "Your son told me to flee," whispered through the blood filling his mouth. "You asked me the same thing once. Let me give you both the reply you deserved." He leaned closer, his lips nearly touching her mandibles. "We don't run, we don't forget, and we never stop coming. You had thousands of years to grow comfortable in your empire. We had 200 years to grow angry. You taught us what you do to the weak." He twisted the blade. "Now we're teaching you what happens when the weak stop being afraid." The light faded from Eth's eyes. Her body collapsed, taking down with it. He lay on the floor of the throne room, staring up at the purple sky through the broken ceiling, and waited to die. But death, it seemed, was not finished with Cole. Human soldiers found him minutes later. They rushed him to a medical ship, shouting words he couldn't understand, pumping him full of drugs that kept his heart beating when it wanted to stop. Doctors worked through the night, fighting to repair damage that should have been fatal. Drifted in and out of consciousness. He dreamed of his old crew, the ones who had died at Europa. They smiled at him and told him it wasn't his time yet. He dreamed of Earth, the blue world he had barely known before the invasion. He dreamed of the future, of human ships spreading across the galaxy, no longer running, no longer afraid. He woke 3 days later on the bridge of the human flagship Unconquered. The ship was massive, built in secret during the years of hiding. Its crew was a mix of humans and freed slaves from a dozen different worlds. Through the viewports could see Prime below, still burning in places. 3 of the 7 high houses had fallen in the attack. 2 more had surrendered. The Empire would never be the same. Whisper was there when he woke, sitting beside his bed with her blind face turned toward him. Stood behind her, all 4 arms crossed, grinning with satisfaction. Ella and an old gathered around, along with others he recognized from the uprising. "Welcome back," Whisper said softly. "We weren't sure you'd make it." "Neither was I," admitted. His voice was rough, his throat dry. "How many did we lose?" 47 slaves died in the fighting, reported. Another 20 were too wounded to save, but we freed over 200 people who would have spent the rest of their lives in chains. And the running scared. Ella's voice was hard with satisfaction. Their fleet is in pieces. Their leadership is dead or captured. For the first time in 3,000 years, they're afraid. Tried to sit up, grimaced at the pain in his side, and lay back down. It's not over. Their empire is still out there. They'll regroup, rebuild, come after us again. "We know," said a new voice. A woman stepped forward from the group. She wore an admiral's uniform, her hair gray, her face lined with years of hardship. Recognized her from the old days before the fall. Admiral, one of the last surviving commanders of the Earth Defense Force. "We've been planning for years," she said. "Waiting for the right moment, the right information. You gave us both." She looked at him with something like awe. "You were a slave for 6 months. You turned an entire estate into a weapon. You killed a high matriarch in single combat. And you gave us everything we needed to cripple the largest military gathering in history." "I did what had to be done," said. "You did more than that." Admiral straightened. "You showed the galaxy that humans aren't prey, that we're not easy targets to be harvested and sold. You showed them what we become when we have nothing left to lose." She stepped back and the crew of the Unconquered parted to reveal the viewport. Through the glass, could see the stars stretching endlessly into the dark. And among those stars, he knew, were other slave markets, other estates, other places where captured people waited in chains, praying for rescue that they thought would never come. "What now, Commander?" Admiral asked. Looked at the stars. He thought about everyone who was still out there, still suffering, still waiting. He thought about the promise he had made in the darkness of the slave quarters, the promise to repay every wound the had inflicted. The emptiness that had lived inside him for months was gone. Something new burned in its place. Something they should have seen in him from the beginning. Something they should have feared. "Now," said slowly, "now we find the rest of them, every slaver, every collaborator, every world that thought humanity was easy prey." He pushed himself up from the bed, ignoring the pain, and stood before the viewport. Whisper took his hand, nodded with fierce approval. The crew of the Unconquered watched their wounded commander with eyes full of hope and hunger. "We're not running anymore," said. "We're not hiding, we're not afraid." He looked back at the stars, and somewhere out there, he knew, the slavers were looking back at him. Soon they would understand what they had created. Soon they would know the price of their cruelty. "From now on," he said, "they run from us." The Unconquered turned toward the endless dark, carrying its crew of survivors and freed slaves toward a future they would build with their own hands. Behind them, Prime burned. Ahead of them, the galaxy waited. And in the cold spaces between stars, the word began to spread. A whisper at first, then a shout, then a roar that echoed through every slave market and conquered world. The humans were coming. And they would never stop.